It was the kind of night where the darkness felt heavier than usual, as though the world itself was holding its breath. The clock on the wall ticked relentlessly, each second echoing in the stillness of the room. Laura stood by the window, her fingers curling around the cold edge of the glass, staring out into the empty street below. A light rain began to fall, soft at first, then heavier, tapping against the windows in rhythmic patterns. But it was the silence that clung to the air, thick with tension, that unsettled her most. The phone had stopped ringing. She had been waiting for it, the call she knew was coming, but the moment it stopped, she felt a sharp pang of dread. She hadn't expected it to be this quiet. No more messages, no more calls, no more warnings, just the weight of her own thoughts, spiraling deeper into a black hole of uncertainty. She turned away from the window and caught her reflection in the darkened glass. For a brief second, she thought she saw someone standing behind her. Her heart jolted, and she spun around, but the room was empty. Her breath came in shallow bursts, the hairs on the back of her neck standing up. There it was again, the feeling that something or someone was waiting. She reached for her phone, trembling as she unlocked it, and her eyes fell on the last message. It's happening. You can't hide forever. Her fingers froze, refusing to scroll any further, as the gravity of the words weighed on her. The message was clear, but it was the sender that made her blood run cold. He had found her. She had hoped, no, prayed, that she could bury her past deep enough to escape it. But now, it was coming for her, clawing its way back to the surface. The sudden ring of her phone shattered the silence, and she nearly dropped it in surprise. She hesitated before answering, but there was no turning back now. A low voice crackled through the receiver, sending a chill down her spine. "It's time," he said. "Are you ready?" And with that, everything she had been running from came rushing back, sweeping her up into a storm she couldn't outrun. Laura had once been a woman with dreams that stretched far beyond the walls of this apartment. She had a life, had being the operative word. Years ago, she had walked away from everything. Her career, her friends, her past. It was her only choice. At least that's how she justified it to herself every day, convincing herself that she was running towards something better, something safe. But that safety came at a cost. She had lost herself in the process. Her eyes fluttered shut as she thought back to the last time she had been truly happy. It was just after college, back when she thought she had it all figured out. The world seemed full of possibility, endless opportunities. But then, there had been him, Matthew. She had loved him with a fierce devotion, a kind of love that made her believe she could conquer anything by his side. But Matthew had been different than she'd realized. Their relationship had been intoxicating at first, full of passion and wild ambition. But it didn't take long for the cracks to show. Matthew had a darker side, a need for control that had slowly begun to warp their connection. Laura tried to ignore it, telling herself it was just a phase. Until one night, it wasn't just a phase, it was a nightmare. That night, everything changed. He had betrayed her, using her trust as a weapon against her. It wasn't just the lies that hurt, but the coldness with which he had torn their world apart. The betrayal shattered her, and it was the thing that sent her running, leaving her past and everything connected to it behind. But no matter how far she ran, the shadow of Matthew's betrayal lingered. It haunted her. She had tried to rebuild, to find a new version of herself, a version that didn't remember the pain. She thought she could hide in the anonymity of a new city, under a new name. But now, as the phone call had confirmed, there was no hiding anymore. The life she had carefully constructed from the ashes of her past was crumbling. And in the stillness of that room, she knew one thing for certain. The time to outrun her demons was over. The question was, what was she going to do when they finally caught up with her? The voice on the other end of the line crackled again, breaking through Laura's thoughts. "You can't run forever, Laura. It's time to face what you've done. You've only got one shot. Don't waste it." Her pulse hammered in her chest. She had wanted to be strong, to stand her ground, but the truth was she felt cornered. There was no hiding anymore. Not from him, not from what she had left behind. She had tried desperately to carve out a new life, But every day since that last phone call had been a reminder. She wasn't free. Not really. The silence stretched between them like an insurmountable gulf until Laura's breath caught in her throat. One shot. The words echoed in her mind. There was no more time for indecision. She couldn't keep running. "I'll do it," she said, the words leaving her lips before she could fully comprehend the magnitude of the decision. The tension in her chest loosened a fraction, but only a fraction. It didn't feel like relief. It felt like the start of something irreversible. "Good. You know what you have to do." The line went dead before she could say anything else. Laura's mind raced. The memories hit her like a flood. The lies. The betrayal. The final blow that had shattered everything. She had thought she'd left it all behind. But now, it was clear. She needed to return to the place she swore she would never step foot in again. The city that held her darkest secrets. The place that would force her to confront Matthew, to face the wreckage of the life she had once built with him. She gathered her things with mechanical precision, packing only the essentials, clothes, a few mementos, her passport. She didn't know what she was walking into, but she knew one thing. If she didn't go, she would never be able to escape. Not in any meaningful way. But as she stepped out into the rain-soaked night, a gnawing feeling of uncertainty clung to her. Had she just made the biggest mistake of her life? Was this a chance for redemption? Or was it a trap? The taxi ride to the airport felt like a blur. The world outside the window was a wash of gray, but inside everything was sharp, every thought too loud in her head. It was too late to turn back now, but the further she moved away from the life she had built, the more it felt like she was walking into a storm she had no control over. She tried to shake off the dread settling in her stomach, but it lingered as she realized one horrifying truth. No matter how far she ran, no matter how many miles she put between herself and her past, the real battle was never with Matthew. It was with herself. As Laura made her way through the crowded terminal, her mind was a whirlwind of anxiety and determination. She had told herself this was the only way forward, but now that she was here, everything felt heavier than ever. Her phone buzzed in her pocket and she hesitated before answering. "Hey, it's me," came the familiar, calm voice of Sarah, her best friend from her years before the move. "I heard about the call. You okay?" Laura forced herself to smile, though the expression felt like a mask. "Yeah, just figuring things out." "Don't lie to me, Laura," Sarah said, the concern in her voice unmistakable. "You're doing it again, aren't you? Running away. This time, you're not alone in this. I'm not going to let you go back to that hellhole without someone by your side." Laura closed her eyes for a moment, grateful for Sarah's steadfast loyalty. It was something she had always relied on, but part of her hesitated. The last time Sarah had tried to step in, she had only gotten hurt. The truth was, Laura didn't want to drag anyone back into the mess of her life. "You don't have to do this, Sarah. It's my problem, not yours." "I'm your friend," Sarah replied firmly. "It's always been my problem too, whether you like it or not. You don't have to go through this alone." Laura's heart softened at her words, but doubt still gnawed at her. Would Sarah be able to handle the truth of what had happened between Laura and Matthew? What had happened to Laura herself? Could anyone? Before she could respond, there was a tap on her shoulder. She turned, startled. Standing before her was a man she hadn't seen in years. David. The face she hadn't realized she was waiting for. "Are you really doing this?" he asked, his tone both soft and accusing, as though he already knew the answer. David had been her partner before she fled, the one she had left behind when she chose to run. He had been different from Matthew, kinder, more patient, more stable. But when things had gotten too complicated, Laura had pulled away from him too. She had always feared that her past with Matthew would somehow poison whatever they could have had. His presence here, at this moment, was a reminder of everything she had lost. "What are you doing here, David?" she asked, trying to keep her voice even. "I couldn't let you go without telling you to think twice," he said, his voice laced with worry. "You know this isn't going to end well. Matthew won't give you what you want, and you can't outrun the past forever." Laura's heart thudded painfully in her chest. The man she had once loved, the man who still cared for her, standing in front of her like this, was a complication she hadn't expected. "I don't have a choice anymore," she said, swallowing hard. I have to face it, no matter what. David's eyes softened, but there was a resignation there now. If you go back, you might lose more than you can handle. Maybe I already have, Laura whispered. As she looked between Sarah's worried expression and David's troubled gaze, she knew that no matter where she went or who she surrounded herself with, this journey, this reckoning, was hers alone. Yet the weight of their concern pressed down on her, reminding her that the people who cared about her were just as much a part of the storm she was about to walk into. Laura sat in the back of the taxi, her fingers white-knuckling the leather strap of her bag. The city outside blurred by, indistinct in its motion, as if mocking her indecision. The moment she stepped into this place, she had expected it to feel like stepping into a dream, a forgotten memory, but instead, it felt like an anchor, dragging her deeper into a past that refused to stay buried. The hotel was small, unremarkable, tucked away on a narrow street. It had been her safe haven the last time she'd come back to face Matthew, a place she had once sworn she'd never return to. And yet, now it felt more like a prison than a refuge. The air was stale, the room's dim lighting casting long shadows across the floor. She sat at the small desk, tracing the edge of the wood with her finger, trying to steady her nerves, but it was no use. The phone call hadn't stopped echoing in her mind. It's time. You can't hide forever. It was clear now that this wasn't just a warning. It was a command, an inescapable pull that yanked her back into this twisted web of betrayal and lies. She had thought she'd outrun it, but no matter how far she went, the past always found a way to catch up. She reached for her phone, hoping for something, anything, that might offer a shred of comfort, but it was Sarah's name that lit up the screen. Laura, I don't like this. Sarah's voice came through, sharp and urgent. You're walking into something dangerous. I can feel it. Are you sure you're doing the right thing? Laura closed her eyes, exhaling a shaky breath. I don't know, Sarah. I really don't, but it feels like the only thing left for me to do. I can't run anymore. You don't have to do this alone, Sarah said, her voice softening. I'm here for you. You know that. Laura clenched her jaw. She did know that, but at the same time, it was exactly why she couldn't involve Sarah any further. The people who cared for her always seemed to get hurt when she tried to fix the mess she'd made, and she couldn't bear to drag Sarah into the fire she was walking into. I'm fine. I'll be okay, Laura lied, but I have to go. Don't do this, Sarah pleaded, but the line went dead before Laura could respond. Setting the phone down, Laura let the silence settle in around her. A part of her wanted to reach out to David too. Maybe he could talk her out of this madness, but she knew deep down that this was something she had to do alone. If she was going to face Matthew again, if she was going to face the wreckage of her past, it had to be on her own terms. No one else could carry that burden for her. The knock on the door startled her, the sound sharp against the quiet of the room. She stood up quickly, her heart thumping in her chest, her mind racing. For a moment, she hesitated, unsure if she was ready for this. But it was too late to back down. She opened the door. David stood there, his face a mixture of determination and concern. You can't just run in without a plan, he said, his voice low, controlled. You're playing into his hands, Laura. What are you doing here? She asked, swallowing the lump that had formed in her throat. I didn't ask you to come. I wasn't going to let you go through this alone, David said, stepping into the room, his gaze steady but full of worry. You're not thinking straight. Laura's chest tightened. She didn't want to hear it. She didn't want to hear him tell her that she was making a mistake. But deep down, a part of her feared he was right. She had come all this way, driven by the belief that she could fix everything, that by facing her demons head on, she could take back control of her life. But what if she was wrong? What if there was no redemption waiting for her at the end of this road? Her mind flickered back to Matthew's words. You can't hide forever. Just go, David, she said, her voice brittle. Please, I need to do this on my own. You don't understand. His gaze hardened. I understand more than you think. I know what Matthew did to you. You think you're just going to walk in there and make things right? You're not going to find what you're looking for. Laura's breath quickened. I don't need your help. I've come this far by myself, and I'm not turning back now. David shook his head, clearly frustrated. You've never been able to do this alone, Laura. That's why you ran in the first place. You're not just fighting Matthew. You're fighting yourself." The words hit her like a slap, and for a moment, Laura felt her resolve waver, but she couldn't afford to let him in. Not now. The past was too painful, too tangled in guilt and regret. She couldn't let David see her like this again. "I don't need you to fix me, David," she said, her voice sharp now, like a wall going up between them. "Just leave." He hesitated, eyes searching hers for something, anything, that would make him stay. Make him believe that she hadn't already fallen too far. But there was nothing. Not anymore. With a defeated sigh, David turned and walked out of the room, leaving Laura standing in the cold silence. She hadn't expected it to hurt this much, but it did. Her insides felt raw, exposed, like a wound that hadn't healed. The sting of his disappointment was almost worse than the fear she had been carrying. The door clicked shut, and the weight of the world settled back down onto her shoulders. She was on her own again. But was she strong enough to face what she had to? The thought haunted her as she paced the room, the ticking of the clock matching the frantic beat of her heart. Each second felt like a countdown to something she wasn't sure she was ready for. It was too late to back out now, but the stakes had never felt higher. Every choice she made now would matter. Life or death, victory or defeat. And she had no idea which it would be. Laura stood at the entrance of the dilapidated building, heart hammering in her chest. She hadn't expected it to be like this. So cold, so abandoned. The building loomed over her, its cracked windows and broken doors, a physical manifestation of everything she had tried to escape. And yet, it was here that she knew she would find the answers she sought. The streets around her were eerily silent, the only sound being the soft, rhythmic patter of the rain on the pavement. She had followed the coordinates to this location, the address buried deep in the message she had received. She had assumed this would be a confrontation, a final showdown with Matthew. But the unease she felt now told her this was something far darker, something more dangerous. Her phone buzzed in her pocket and she pulled it out, already dreading who it could be. It was Sarah's name again, but this time, she didn't hesitate to answer. "Laura," Sarah's voice came through, panicked and urgent. "You need to get out of there. You don't know what you're walking into." "Sarah, Laura started to speak, but the words caught in her throat. She looked up and froze. Standing in the doorway of the building, silhouetted against the dim light inside, was a figure she never thought she would see again. Matthew. His face was the same, but older, harder. He hadn't changed, not in the ways that mattered. His eyes locked onto hers, and for a brief, terrifying second, she saw the flicker of something she hadn't expected. Regret. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced with the cold indifference that had once defined him. "Laura," he said, his voice low but chilling, like a whisper meant for only her. "You came back." Her breath caught in her throat, and she felt the walls of her control begin to crumble. Everything inside her screamed to run, to escape, but her feet were rooted to the spot. She couldn't look away from him. He had always had that effect on her. "Why?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "Why are you doing this?" Matthew stepped forward, his gaze never leaving hers. "You think you've come here for redemption, Laura? You've always thought you could fix things, but you can't fix this. It's already too late." Laura's mind raced, confusion and fear clouding her thoughts. What did he mean? Too late for what? Before she could ask, a second figure emerged from the shadows, stepping into the light. The blood drained from her face. It was David. "David?" Her voice trembled, disbelief flooding her system. "What is this? What's going on?" David's eyes were distant, almost cold as he walked toward Matthew, standing beside him like a silent partner. The weight of the moment hit her like a punch to the stomach. "You knew," Laura said, the accusation hanging in the air. Her heart ached, a mix of betrayal and confusion threatening to choke her. "You knew all along?" David didn't meet her gaze. Instead, he looked down, as though ashamed. "I didn't want you to find out this way, Laura," he said quietly, "but you had to know the truth." Her stomach churned. The truth. "About what?" she demanded, her voice rising. What truth? That you and Matthew were in this together? That everything I've been running from was because of you? David sighed deeply, the sound filled with regret. You never understood, Laura. We weren't trying to hurt you. We were trying to protect you. Protect me? Her voice cracked. From what? From myself? The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Matthew stepped forward, his expression unreadable. It was never about protecting you. It was about control. You were always so determined to outrun your past, to pretend you could escape. But the past never lets you go. Her pulse pounded in her ears, everything swirling around her. The betrayal, the lies, the realization that the people she had trusted most had orchestrated her suffering. The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. You were never meant to find out, Matthew added, his voice cold. We wanted you to stay gone, Laura. You didn't belong here, and now that you've come back, well, you've opened a door that can't be closed. Everything she thought she knew about herself, about the people she loved, felt like it had shattered in an instant. The weight of the revelation. David, her former lover, had been part of this twisted game all along, hit her harder than anything Matthew had done. This wasn't just a battle for redemption. It was a trap, a game they had been playing behind her back, all to keep her in the dark. And now, the stakes were higher than ever. She had been wrong about everything. There was no redemption waiting for her here. There was only a game she had unwittingly stepped into, one that she might not be able to survive. Laura felt a sickening wave of nausea rise in her throat as she stood there, frozen in disbelief. Her entire world, everything she thought she knew, everything she had worked for, had come crashing down in that one brutal revelation. Matthew and David, partners in crime, betrayers of her trust. Her legs weakened beneath her, and for a moment it felt like the ground was slipping away. The very people she had loved, the people she had believed in, had been using her, controlling her, keeping her locked in a narrative she hadn't even known she was part of. You... Laura's words stumbled over themselves, struggling to find purchase in the haze of shock. I trusted you. David looked at her, and there was something broken in his eyes, a sadness that almost made her feel pity. Almost. I never wanted it to end this way, Laura. You have to understand. I don't want to understand, she snapped, her voice breaking. She took a step back, her hands shaking, as the reality of the situation set in. I trusted you, David, and you knew. You knew everything. You knew what Matthew was capable of, and you never told me. You just let me. I was trying to protect you, David interrupted, his voice rising in frustration. You wouldn't have been able to handle the truth. He was dangerous, Laura, and you? She laughed bitterly, the sound empty and hollow. You thought you could keep me safe by lying to me? By playing me like one of your games? Tears of frustration welled in her eyes, but she wiped them away angrily, determined not to show weakness. Not now. Not when everything was at stake. She had already given up so much. She wasn't going to give in to this too. This is it, she whispered, her voice hoarse. I've made my choice, and now I have to deal with the consequences. I'm not running anymore. Her chest tightened with a mix of rage and sorrow, but beneath it all, there was a glimmer of clarity. She was done being a pawn in this twisted game. It was time to take control. She turned away from them, heading for the door, her steps steady, despite the whirlwind inside her. This wasn't just about confronting Matthew anymore. This was about reclaiming her life. Whether she was ready for it or not, the truth had come out. And now, it was time to face it. To fight. There was no going back. But with the truth in her hands, she had one final chance to make everything right. Or let it destroy her. The rain had grown heavier, lashing against the cracked windows of the abandoned building like 1,000 whispers. Laura could barely hear the noise now, her mind drowned in a cacophony of memories, of lies, and of a world she no longer recognized. Standing in the center of the cold, empty room, she felt every heartbeat reverberate through her chest, each one a reminder of everything that had brought her here. Matthew's presence loomed behind her like a shadow, silent but oppressive. David stood to the side, his arms crossed, his eyes unreadable. They had been her allies. They had been her betrayers. And now, as she faced them both, Laura realized that the war wasn't just with them anymore. It was with herself. She could feel the weight of her past settling on her shoulders, every mistake, every choice that had led her here. This was the moment she had been avoiding her whole life, the reckoning. "You're making a mistake, Laura." Matthew's voice was cold, almost mocking. "You think you can walk away from this, that you can rewrite everything you've done? It's too late for that." Laura spun around, meeting his gaze with a fire that had been absent from her eyes for too long. She had run from him, from the truth, from herself for years. But now, standing here, the fear, the anger, the shame, they no longer controlled her. "I'm not here to rewrite anything," she said, her voice steady. "I'm here to finally face what I've been running from, and that includes you." Matthew smirked, stepping closer, his shadow enveloping her. "You really think you're strong enough to handle what's coming, don't you?" "I don't think you have a clue what it means to face the consequences of your actions." The room seemed to close in on her as the air grew thick with tension. Every word from Matthew, every accusation, seemed designed to unravel her, to draw her back into the same old trap he had built around her for years. But Laura refused to be pulled in. Not this time. "Do you really think I'm afraid of you anymore?" she asked, her voice gaining strength with each word. "You used to control me with fear, but not anymore. I've learned that the only person I've been running from is myself." There was a brief, unsettling pause. Matthew's eyes flickered with something, surprise, maybe. But then it was gone, replaced with that same arrogance. David spoke next, his voice quieter, almost apologetic. "Laura, you don't understand. You can't just walk away from this. You think you're in control? You're not. There's too much at stake." "Too much at stake?" she echoed, her voice rising now, the years of anger bubbling to the surface. "What you and Matthew have been doing isn't about protecting anyone, it's about control. I'm done being your pawn, David." David flinched at the words but didn't speak. He simply watched her, a mixture of guilt and resignation in his eyes. The room felt smaller still, the air thick with unspoken truths. And for a moment, Laura could almost feel the weight of the world pressing down on her. The truth was, she wasn't sure if she was ready to face this final test. But one thing was certain, there was no going back. Matthew advanced, his face now inches from hers. "You really think you can beat me, Laura? You think you can escape everything I've done to you? You think you have the strength to destroy me?" Laura's pulse thundered in her ears. She could feel the cold of his breath on her skin, his presence suffocating. But as he spoke, something inside her shifted. She wasn't afraid of him anymore. Not his words, not his power. She was afraid of herself, of what she might lose if she didn't take this chance. "You're wrong," she said, a cold calm settling over her. "This isn't about escaping you. It's about breaking free from the fear you've planted in me for so long." And then, with a suddenness that shocked them all, Laura took a step forward, her eyes blazing with resolve. "You never controlled me, Matthew," she said, her voice a steady force. "You just made me believe you did." The silence that followed was deafening, a sharp, palpable tension hanging in the air. The moment felt suspended, like everything that had happened up until now was building to this one irreversible point. David stepped forward, reaching out to her, his face tight with emotion. "Laura, please, don't do this." But Laura didn't hesitate. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The moment where everything changed. She stepped around David, her gaze never leaving Matthew. The room seemed to pulse around her, the walls closing in. But she stood her ground. She had made her decision. Without warning, she reached into her pocket and pulled out the small silver key, the one Matthew had given her all those years ago, the key to the doors he had locked her behind, the symbol of everything she had tried to escape. But now, she wasn't running anymore. She wasn't hiding. She stepped toward the rusted locked door at the far end of the room and inserted the key. The sound of the tumbler shifting echoed through the space, loud in the stillness. For the first time in years, Laura felt a surge of power, a sense of ownership over her own life. The door creaked open with a long, groaning sound, and Laura stood there for a moment, her hand resting on the frame. She could feel the weight of Matthew and David's gaze behind her, the pressure mounting, but she didn't flinch. "This is where it ends," she said, her voice firm. "Not because of you, because of me." She stepped through the door. As she did, she heard Matthew's voice behind her, softer now, almost pleading. "You'll never be free, Laura. You'll always be running." But Laura didn't turn back. The door closed behind her with a sharp click, leaving only the echo of her footsteps and the sound of her own breath. She had crossed the threshold, and whatever was waiting for her on the other side, she was ready. This was her moment, her final test, and there was no turning back. The consequences were irreversible. But for the first time, Laura didn't mind. The world felt unnaturally still as Laura stood on the other side of the door, the heavy sound of it closing behind her still echoing in her ears. For a moment, everything seemed suspended, as though time itself had taken a breath and held it. The building was silent now, its oppressive weight seemingly lifted, but the sense of danger still lingered, a ghost in the air. Her heart was pounding in her chest, each beat a sharp reminder of everything that had just transpired. The key was still clenched in her hand, cold metal biting into her palm. She hadn't known what would happen when she opened that door. She hadn't known if it would be the end of the road or a new beginning, but there was no going back now. She glanced around the empty room she had entered, bare, bleak, and abandoned, except for the faint trace of dust and the dull echo of her own breath. The familiar sense of being trapped, of being powerless, was gone. For the first time in years, Laura was alone, but not in the way she had feared. Her legs felt unsteady as she took her first few steps, the weight of the decision pressing on her chest like a leaden cloud. She had crossed the threshold, but what was waiting for her on the other side? Was she free? Or had she simply opened a door to something even worse? The tension still gripped her, her mind racing with unanswered questions, with a sense of unfinished business. But as the minutes passed, she realized the most important thing. She had changed. She wasn't running anymore, and that made all the difference. Back in the building, she knew the consequences of what she had left behind were already taking shape. David's betrayal still stung, but she could no longer carry the burden of it. Their relationship had been built on a lie, and no amount of apology could undo that. As for Matthew, his grip on her was weakening, but she had no illusions. He was still dangerous, still a threat, but now he was no longer her enemy. He was simply a part of her past that she would leave behind. And yet there was a nagging feeling in her chest, a warning she couldn't shake. The door she had closed might have shut out the past, but it had also opened something else, something unknown. And there was still the sense that the story was far from over. The danger hadn't disappeared, only shifted, like a shadow lurking just beyond the light. But for now, she was free. Or at least, she felt free. As the sun began to rise, casting long golden beams of light through the cracks in the walls of the room, Laura sat on the floor, her back against the cold, concrete surface. The past was no longer chasing her. The ghosts, the lies, the fear, all of it seemed to have evaporated with the first rays of dawn. She had taken control of her own life, and it felt like both a triumph and a release. Her journey had been a brutal one, but in the end, it had been necessary. The man who had once controlled her was no longer a threat, and the life she had built on lies was finally shattered, leaving her with nothing but truth. The truth about herself. The truth about her strength. The truth that no matter how dark the path had been, she was capable of walking through it. Her mind kept returning to the moment when she stepped through the door, when the past finally fell away. She had known it wouldn't be easy, but the weight she had been carrying for years had lifted. It wasn't gone completely. There were still pieces of it inside her, fragments she would have to confront. But for the first time, she felt like she could breathe again. There was still so much left unresolved. David's fate, Matthew's next move, the consequences of her decisions. Those questions still hovered in her mind like a cloud, but they didn't feel as pressing. She had done what she needed to do. taken that one final step toward freedom, even if she didn't know what it meant yet. As she stood up and walked toward the door of the room, her fingers brushed against the surface of the metal. She wasn't sure where she was going next. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt like she could face it. But then her phone buzzed in her pocket. She took it out, and her heart stopped. It was a message from an unknown number. You may have won this round, but the game is far from over. This is only the beginning. A chill ran down her spine, and the weight of the message settled over her like a heavy cloak. She had thought she was free, but the truth was, the door she had closed had only opened another one. And as she stood there, staring at the message, she realized that the path ahead wasn't going to be easy. But maybe, just maybe, she was finally ready to face whatever came next. She had taken back control, and now she would never let go. The past may never truly let go, but neither will I.